I wasn't eating, I wasn't really sleeping. I had skin rashes all over my body. And I went to the doctor and I said, I've got all these skin rashes everywhere.
What advice do you have for women in male-dominated environments?
Well, firstly, hi, Megan. I think one of the first ones that I'd like to say is that be yourself. And there's a real difference between belonging and fitting in. And I think when I first joined the military, especially when I first arrived at my frontline squadron, I just tried to fit in, and I tried to be somebody that I wasn't actually. I was probably a lot more blokey than I am. I was swearing more. I was probably drinking a lot more. And I just tried to fit into that culture. And I think it doesn't really matter what culture you're trying to get into. If you're just trying too hard, you're never bringing your true self to work. And I think the really important thing there is that you go back to actually remembering who you are and actually bringing your true self to work is the most important thing. And when you find that, that's when you get true belonging.
So moving on to your military career, how did you manage the pressure of an active war zone?
Well, it's difficult, actually. I mean, I was a lot younger when I was flying over Iraq. And interestingly, one of the biggest pressures I found was not the one that most people would assume you would have. Most people would say, oh, it's the worry of being shot at or of dying. It's the worry of letting your team down. And that was the biggest concern for me. And so you're doing everything that you can with regards to the planning. So how are you actually, let's say, minimize the stress of actually when you're flying a combat mission is by preparing every single eventuality. And so it's called threat and error management, really. And what you're doing is you're looking at all the threats that are out there, any potential errors that can be made, and you're planning for them so that when something happens, it's not a crisis or an emergency. You've planned for it and you're simply putting that cassette in and you're saying, right, I know what to do about this. We've discussed it on the ground. We've come up with a plan. And actually, that's something that it's utilized all the time in business, isn't it? Of using those quieter periods to really look at people's industries, perhaps the weaknesses or where are the threats within businesses, and actually coming up with plans for each of those eventualities. And that's exactly what we did in a war zone. And that's exactly how we manage stress as well, by planning, utilizing periods of downtime to really get ahead of the game. And actually, I found, bizarrely, I didn't find it as stressful as perhaps people might think.
How did you ensure your mental well-being while you were serving in the military?
So mental health and well-being really, I would say, is talked about a lot more now. Well, we all know it's talked about a lot more now. You can't literally, move for hearing about, mental health. It was barely mentioned when I was in the military. And I think the most stressful period I had was when I was going through flying training, actually. And you're flying the Hawk aircraft, which is the one that the Red Arrows fly. And it's quite a basic, certainly the model I was flying was a very basic variant of that. So there was no GPS, there was no moving map. There was, literally had a paper map, a stopwatch and a compass. And you're trying to do all this mental gymnastics in your head. It was really stressful. One of my colleagues described it as doing an advanced driving test twice a day for 10 months. So you can imagine the pressure is immense. And if you started to struggle, there was very little discussed in the form of, mental first aid and mental health. There was nothing. And actually, it was a real case of it. I would suppose we would say it was quite misogynistic in those days. It was full of quite a lot of red alpha male characters. And when you started to struggle, it was almost like, we found a weakness, right? You won't be good enough to get to the front line because you're showing, a fallibility in this certain area, chopped. Now that has changed. Again, that has changed because they've recognized they've spent all this money, time, effort invested in these people, and they're just going to get rid of them because people are struggling. And so now they have life coaches, they talk about mental health, and it's just so much more refreshing to hear. I mean, I was very, very stressed at Valley when I look back, when I was going through that final stages, and I'd failed a couple of trips. And, I wasn't eating, I wasn't really sleeping. I had skin rashes all over my body. And I went to the doctor and I said, I've got all these skin rashes everywhere. And he just simply said, have you changed your washing powder? Not, are you incredibly stressed? And sometimes, your body can have a physical reaction to it. Didn't discuss that at all. Basically, I thought, well, I haven't changed my washing powder. I can't think what it could be. And so, we just weren't talking about it. And I think, therefore, we bottled it up. And I know that a lot of people really did struggle, actually. And I think I certainly did. And I wouldn't have got through it had it not been for my colleagues actually identifying that I was very stressed and them coming up with solutions to help me, which, I talk about when I do my speeches about sort of cycling around on bicycles and, practicing things in different ways. And bizarrely, that camaraderie was the thing that helped me manage my stress, as opposed to the organizational assisting in any way.
So how can businesses facilitate a work-life balance, particularly for their female employees?
Well, I don't think it is just for them females. I think so much we've talked about the work-life balance around, the female side of things. But I think until you have that full inclusion across the entire board, not just for women, for men, and as soon as men want it, and I think what we've seen in lockdown, and that's why I sort of mentioned this as just this huge catalyst, is that men have realized they don't want to be commuting daily. They don't want that. And neither do women. People don't want to do that. And so rather than just carrying on the way we were doing it, all businesses are seeing this huge change. And so it's not just a work-life balance, it's just life. So it's almost saying, what, businesses have realized they can trust their employees to work from home. They can be empowered. In fact, we've actually seen productivity go up for many of the different environments from working from home, because people almost are wanting to prove that does work. And there's no distractions either, is there? So you're not basically chatting to people around the coffee bar for hours. And so if you take away all of those little bits in a day, you're probably gaining another maybe 1 hour, possibly 2 hours of a working day. And to put on top of that, not commuting, people feel that they've got a much better quality of life. And I think that's something that's going to come as a real positive out of the whole of the pandemic.